At my granddaughter's wedding, I noticed my name tag said, "The old woman who pays for everything." I didn't say anything. I just smiled and walked inside. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and tell me where you're watching from. I'd really like to know how far this moment travels. The ballroom at the Westbrook Hotel looked exactly like something out of a magazine. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, scattering soft light across round tables dressed in ivory linen. Each centerpiece was carefully arranged, white roses, eucalyptus, and tall glass candles flickering like they were part of a dream someone else was living. This was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. My granddaughter, Emily, was getting married. I had spent the past 6 months making sure everything would be perfect. I paid for the venue, the catering, the flowers, even the string quartet that was now playing softly near the stage. Every check had been written quietly. No announcements. No expectations. Because that's what family does, I told myself. You give. You support. You show up. And today, I had shown up early. I remember standing in front of my mirror that morning, adjusting the soft blue dress I had picked weeks ago. It was simple, elegant. My late husband used to say that color made my eyes look brighter. For a moment, I almost felt like myself again. Almost. But that feeling didn't last long. Because now, standing at the entrance of the reception hall, holding that small rectangular name tag in my hand, I realized something had shifted. Not suddenly, not loudly, but quietly, deliberately. I pinned the tag onto my dress. The old woman who pays for everything. The words sat there like a stain no one else could see, or maybe everyone could. As I walked further into the room, I noticed a few glances. Quick ones. Some people looked away too fast. Others looked just a second too long. And a few smiled. Not warmly, not kindly, but knowingly. I moved slowly toward the nearest table, my heels soft against the polished floor. The music continued. Glasses clinked. Laughter filled the air. Everything looked normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. I spotted my son across the room. He was standing beside his wife, my daughter-in-law, Karen, laughing with a group of guests. His hand rested comfortably on her. Back like always. Like she was the center of his world. Like I had never been. For a brief second, I thought about walking over, asking him, "Did you see this? Do you know what this says?" But I didn't. Because deep down, I already knew the answer. Instead, I picked up a glass of water from a passing tray and held it steady in my hand, even though my fingers felt slightly colder than they should. Karen's voice carried across the room. Bright, confident, effortless. She insisted on paying for everything, she was saying to someone. We told her not to, but you know, she doesn't have much else going on. A small ripple of laughter followed. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, something inside me became very clear. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a mistake. And this wasn't the first time. It was simply the first time they decided to stop hiding it. I found my seat near the edge of the ballroom. Table 12. Not close to the stage. Not close to the family table. Not even close enough to clearly see Emily when she would cut the cake. Just far enough to be included, but not important. I placed my purse gently on the chair beside me and sat down, smoothing my dress like everything was exactly as it should be. The music swelled slightly as more guests filled the room. Waiters moved gracefully between tables, offering champagne and appetizers. Conversations overlapped into a soft hum that should have felt warm. But it didn't. It felt distant. Like I was watching everything through glass. I glanced down at my name tag again. The old woman who pays for everything. The lettering was elegant. Gold ink. Carefully written. That was what struck me the most. This wasn't rushed. It wasn't careless. Someone had taken their time with this. Which meant someone had planned it. I lifted my eyes slowly and began to observe the room more carefully. At the front, near the stage, I saw Karen again. She was now directing one of the staff members, pointing toward the dessert table, her voice calm but firm. She had always liked being in control of things. Even years ago, when she first joined our family, she had a way of rearranging everything quietly, until one day you realized nothing was the same anymore. At the time, I thought it was just her personality. Strong, organized, particular. I even admired it. But sitting here now, something about it felt different. Calculated. I turned slightly in my chair as two women at the next table leaned closer to each other, their voices low but not low enough. "Is that her?" one of them whispered. "The one who paid for all of this?" The other nodded, her eyes flicking toward me before quickly looking away. I heard she sold her retirement investments for this wedding. A pause. That's a lot. Another pause. Well, the first woman said softly, at least she's being recognized. A quiet laugh followed. Not cruel, but not kind either. I kept my gaze forward, my expression unchanged. But inside, something tightened. Retirement investments. Yes, I had used them. Not all at once, not recklessly, just little by little. To help. To make things easier. To make sure Emily had the wedding she deserved. Because that's what I believed. That love looked like sacrifice. That family meant giving without keeping score. But now, I wondered, had they been keeping score all along? I reached for the glass of water in front of me and took a small sip. It felt colder than before. Across the room, I finally saw Emily. She looked beautiful, radiant in her white gown, her smile bright and effortless as she greeted guests near the stage. For a moment, my chest softened. This was still her day? Whatever this was, whatever I was feeling, it wasn't her fault. At least, that's what I wanted to believe. But then I noticed something. She passed by Karen, leaning in to say something quietly. Karen smiled. Then, she glanced in my direction. Just for a second. And in that second, I saw it. Not surprise. Not confusion. Recognition. As if she already knew exactly what I had read. As if she had been waiting for this moment. I lowered my eyes slowly. And that was when the first real question formed in my mind. Not why would someone do this? But something much quieter. Much heavier. I stayed seated for a while longer. Long enough for the room to feel louder, and me to feel quieter. Then I stood up. Slowly. Carefully. As if nothing inside me had shifted. I picked up my purse and walked toward the check-in table near the entrance. The same place where I had received the name tag. The young woman who had greeted me earlier was still there, organizing a small stack of envelopes. She looked up when I approached, her expression polite but slightly nervous. Excuse me, I said gently, my voice steady. I think there may have been a mistake with my name tag. Her eyes flickered briefly to my chest, and then away. Just for a second. But it was enough. Oh, she hesitated, then forced a small smile. Let me check. She reached under the table and pulled out a clipboard. Her fingers moved quickly over a printed list of names, scanning, stopping, then scanning again. I watched her. Not impatient. Not upset. Just watching. There should be another card for you, she said finally, her voice softer now. Let me see if we have a replacement. She turned, rifling through a small box of extra name tags. I noticed the way her shoulders were slightly tense. The way she avoided looking at me directly. And then, she found it. She pulled out another card. This one's simpler. Plain black lettering. She handed it to me with both hands, almost like she was offering something fragile. I took it. Looked down. Margaret Hale. My name. Nothing more. Nothing less. I nodded slightly. Thank you. But I didn't pin it on. Not yet. Instead, I held both cards in my hand. The one I had been given. And the one I should have been given. And for a moment, I just stood there, feeling the weight of something invisible settle into place. Ma'am, the young woman said quietly, lowering her voice. I just print what I'm given. I don't decide the wording. I looked up at her. Her eyes were sincere, uneasy, almost apologetic. I know, I said gently. And I meant it. Because this had never been about her. Who provided the list? I asked. She hesitated. Just for a second. Then she answered. The event coordinator. Mrs. Karen Hale. Of course. I felt something inside me go still. Not break. Not shatter. Just settle. Like a puzzle piece finally clicking into place. Thank you, I said again. I turned away before she could say anything else. As I walked back into the ballroom, I slipped the correct name tag into my purse and pinned the other one back onto my dress. The old woman. Who pays for everything. I wore it. Not because I accepted it, but because I needed to understand it. Across the room, Karen was still moving effortlessly between guests, her smile perfectly measured, her posture flawless. She caught my eye again. This time, she didn't look away. She held my gaze. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she smiled. Not warmly, not kindly, but knowingly, as if she was waiting for a reaction, a confrontation, a scene, something she could dismiss, something she could control. But I didn't give her that. Instead, I smiled back, just as softly, just as calmly. And then I turned and walked toward the center of the room. Because now, I understood something important. This wasn't just about embarrassment. It wasn't just about a cruel joke. This was a message. Carefully written, carefully placed, carefully delivered. And for the first time that evening, I stopped asking why and started asking something else. What else have they done that I haven't seen? Yet I didn't go back to my seat right away. Instead, I walked slowly along the edge of the ballroom, my eyes drifting over the details I had once admired. The flowers, the lighting, the carefully arranged place settings. Every element of this wedding carried a piece of me, not visibly, not proudly displayed, but quietly embedded in the cost of it all. And as I walked, something else began to surface, not from the room, but from memory. Small moments, tiny things I had dismissed at the time, things that now felt different, sharper, clearer. I remembered Emily's high school graduation. For years ago, I had arrived early, just like today, carrying a small gift I had spent weeks choosing, a delicate gold bracelet with her birthstone, something meaningful, something lasting. But when I got there, Karen met me at the entrance. "Oh, you're here already," she had said, smiling too quickly. "They actually changed the seating plan last minute. It's a bit tight inside." I remember nodding, stepping back, waiting outside longer than I should have. By the time I was finally allowed in, the ceremony had already started. I missed her walking across the stage, missed her name being called, missed the moment I had imagined for years. At the time, Karen had apologized. Lightly, effortlessly. "These things happen," she said. And I believed her, because I wanted to. Then there was Christmas. 2 years ago, I had spent days preparing dinner, cooking everything from scratch, just the way my husband used to like. The house smelled warm, familiar, full of memory. Karen called me the morning of. "Oh, Margaret, I'm so sorry. We decided to keep things small this year. Just immediate family." I remember standing in my kitchen, phone in hand, trying to understand. "Immediate family?" I asked. "Yes," she said gently. "It'll just be us and a few close friends. You know how hectic things get." I said I understood. I always said I understood. Later that evening, I saw the photos. A full table. Laughter. Champagne. Everyone there. Except me. And then, the smaller things. The quiet things. The things no one else would notice. The way Karen would answer questions directed at me before I had the chance to speak. The way decisions were made and only explained afterward. The way my role in the family slowly shifted. From central to optional to symbolic. I stopped being asked. Started being informed. And eventually, I stopped even noticing. Until now. I paused near one of the tall windows, the soft glow of the ballroom reflecting faintly against the glass. For a moment, I caught my reflection. The blue dress, the silver hair, the name tag, the old woman who pays for everything. I looked at myself for a long second, not with sadness, not even with anger, but with something quieter, recognition, because suddenly it all made sense. This wasn't a single act. It wasn't one cruel decision made in poor taste. It was a pattern, carefully built over time, layer by layer, moment by moment, until I had been reduced to exactly what that name tag said. Not a mother, not a grandmother, not even a guest, just a function, a resource, a quiet presence that funded everything and questioned nothing. I exhaled slowly, and as I did, something shifted. Not in the room, not in the people around me, but inside me. For years, I had told myself a story, that I was helping, that I was needed, that this was love. But standing there now, I realized something far more unsettling. I hadn't been included. I had been used. And the most painful part wasn't what they had done. It was how long I had allowed it. I straightened my posture slightly, smoothing the fabric of my dress one more time. Across the room, the music began to change. A signal. The next part of the evening was about to begin. People started moving toward the center, gathering, preparing, and I knew instinctively that whatever came next wasn't going to be accidental. Not anymore. Because now, I was finally paying attention. "Grandma." The voice was soft, careful, almost hesitant. I turned slightly and saw Emily standing a few steps behind me. Up close, she looked even more beautiful than she had from across the room. The delicate lace of her gown caught the light, and her eyes, those same eyes she had as a child, searched my face with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Uncertainty. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. I smiled. The same calm smile I had been wearing all evening. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said. And for a moment, I almost believed it. She stepped closer, her gaze dropping briefly to my name tag. I watched the exact moment she read it. Her expression didn't change dramatically. There was no gasp, no outrage, just a small pause, a flicker, something quickly hidden. And then she looked back at me. They must have made a mistake, she said, softly, quickly, as if the explanation had already been prepared. I tilted my head slightly. Do you think so? She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Then she nodded. Yes. I mean, the coordinator probably mixed things up. The coordinator. Karen. I held her gaze gently, not accusing, not pressing, just waiting, because sometimes silence invites more truth than questions ever could. Emily shifted her weight slightly, glancing over her shoulder toward the center of the room. They're about to start the speeches, she said. I just wanted to check on you. I reached out and touched her hand lightly. I'm glad you did. And I meant that. Because in that moment, she wasn't part of the room. She was just my granddaughter again. The little girl who used to sit beside me in the kitchen, swinging her legs as I baked cookies. The one who used to ask me questions about everything. The one who used to say, Grandma, you always make things better. But that little girl felt far away now, replaced by someone who had learned when to speak and when not to. I'll see you after the speeches, okay? She said. I nodded. Of course. She gave my hand a gentle squeeze, then turned and walked away, disappearing back into the crowd of guests. I watched her go, and as I did, a quiet understanding settled in. She knew, not everything, but enough. Enough to recognize what that name tag meant. Enough to feel uncomfortable, but not enough to stop it. Or maybe, not enough to risk stopping it. I lowered my hand slowly, and that was when I heard another voice. This one older, steadier. Margaret. I turned again. This time, it was Martin Reynolds, my husband's attorney. He stood a few feet away, holding a glass of champagne he hadn't touched. His suit was as precise as always, his expression calm, but his eyes were different. They lingered, not on my face, but on the name tag. I was wondering when you'd notice, he said quietly. I studied him for a moment. You knew? I asked. He nodded once. I noticed it earlier. At the check-in table. A pause. I assumed you had approved it. I let out a soft breath. No, I said. I didn't. He didn't look surprised. That was what struck me the most. Not shock. Not confusion. Just confirmation. I see, he said. We stood in silence for a moment, the sound of music and conversation continuing around us like nothing had changed. Then he spoke again. Margaret, there's something I think you should be aware of. I turned slightly toward him. Not tense. Not alarmed. Just attentive. Because something in his tone had shifted. Lower. More deliberate. This event, he continued carefully, isn't just a wedding. I felt a faint chill move through me. What do you mean? He glanced briefly toward the stage, then back at me. There are documents being prepared. A pause. Financial ones. The room seemed to blur slightly at the edges. What kind of documents? I asked. Martin exhaled quietly. The kind that usually require signatures from family members who have contributed significant assets. I didn't move. Didn't speak. But inside something sharpened. They're planning to present them tonight, he said. During or after the speeches. Another pause. And based on what I've seen, his eyes flicked once more to the name tag on my chest. I don't think this label is a joke. The music swelled again. Guests began moving closer to the stage. The speeches were about to begin. And suddenly, everything made sense. The name tag. The whispers. The glances. The careful wording. This wasn't about embarrassment. It was positioning. Framing. Reducing me to a role. So that when the moment came, no one would question it. I looked at Martin. Calmly. Thank you, I said. He nodded once, then stepped back into the crowd, leaving me standing alone near the window. But I didn't feel alone anymore, because now, I finally understood the shape of what was coming. And for the first time that evening, I wasn't reacting. I was preparing. The speeches began. One by one, people stepped onto the stage. Laughter. Applause. Stories carefully chosen to sound warm, polished, appropriate. I took my seat again. Table 12. Same place. Same distance. But nothing inside me was the same anymore. I sat with my hands folded neatly in my lap, my posture straight, my expression calm. To anyone looking from the outside, I was exactly what I had always been. Quiet. Supportive. Uncomplicated. But inside, I was listening differently. Watching differently. Not as a guest, but as someone finally paying attention. Karen was the third person to speak. Of course she was. She walked to the center of the stage with effortless confidence, the microphone steady in her hand, her smile perfectly measured. "Good evening, everyone," she began. Her voice carried smoothly across the room. "I want to thank all of you for being here to celebrate Emily and Daniel on this beautiful day." Polite applause. She paused just long enough. Just enough to control the room. "This wedding has been a labor of love," she continued. "So many people came together to make this happen." Her eyes moved across the audience. Then, briefly, they landed on me. "And of course," she added lightly, "we had a little help from family." A few soft chuckles. I didn't react. Didn't move. I simply sat there, wearing the name she had given me. The old woman who pays for everything. Karen continued speaking, weaving together stories, compliments, carefully crafted moments designed to keep the room warm and entertained. But beneath it, there was something else. A tone. Subtle. Controlled. She was setting the stage. Not just for the wedding. For something else. I could feel it now. The way her words circled around the idea of support. Contribution. Legacy. Words that sounded harmless. Until you listened closely. Until you understood who they were meant to point to. After a few minutes, she stepped back slightly, her smile widening. "And before we move on," she said, "there's just one small thing we'd like to do." The room quieted. I felt it. That shift. That moment when attention sharpens. Expectation rises. Karen gestured toward the side of the stage. A man stepped forward. I recognized him immediately. Not personally, but professionally. A legal assistant. He carried a slim folder in his hands. Dark. Structured. Deliberate. My eyes didn't leave it. "This is just a simple acknowledgement," Karen said smoothly. "A way to formally recognize the generosity that helped bring today together." A pause. "So we can all celebrate, properly." Soft laughter again. Light. Unaware. But I wasn't unaware anymore. I watched as the assistant opened the folder, removing a set of papers. Multiple pages. Clipped neatly together. Prepared. Final. "Margaret," Karen said, her voice warm now. Inviting. Public. Every head in the room turned. Toward me. I didn't move immediately. I let the silence stretch just a fraction longer than expected. Just enough. Then I stood. Slowly. Calmly. Every step I took toward the stage felt measured. Not heavy. Not hesitant. Just intentional. The room watched. Some with curiosity. Some with polite interest. And a few with something closer to anticipation. I reached the front. Close enough to see the papers clearly now. Close enough to see Karen's expression without distance softening it. She handed me a pen. Elegant. Expensive. Prepared. "All we need," she said gently, "is your signature." I looked down at the document. My name was already printed at the bottom. Margaret Hale. Beneath it, a blank line. Waiting. I didn't read it immediately. Instead, I lifted my eyes and looked at her. Really looked. At the calm. At the confidence. At the certainty. She believed this would work. That I would smile. Sign. Sit back down. And everything would continue exactly as she had planned. For years, that's exactly what I would have done. But tonight, something was different. I lowered my gaze back to the paper. And this time, I began to read. Slowly. Carefully. Word by word. The room grew quieter. The music had stopped. Even the staff seemed to pause. Because something wasn't unfolding the way it was supposed to. And for the first time that evening, Karen's smile shifted. Just slightly. Almost imperceptibly. But I saw it. Because now, I was paying attention. And I wasn't just standing there to be recognized. I was standing there to understand exactly what they thought I would agree to. Before I decided what I was going to do next. Top of form, bottom of form, the paper was heavier than it looked. Not physically, but in what it carried. I held it steady in my hands, my eyes moving slowly across the lines, ignoring the weight of every gaze in the room. Legal language. Carefully constructed. Polite. Harmless, at first glance. But I had lived long enough to know that the most dangerous things are rarely loud. They are written softly, wrapped in words like acknowledgement, family agreement, voluntary contribution. I read the first paragraph again, then the second, and by the third, everything became clear. This wasn't a thank you. It wasn't recognition. It was transfer. A formal statement declaring that all financial contributions made toward the wedding were gifts. Irrevocable. Non-refundable. Without future claim. I felt a quiet stillness settle over me. Not shock. Not anger. Just clarity. But then I kept reading. Because something told me this wasn't the real purpose. And I was right. Halfway down the page there it was. A clause. Small. Almost hidden. But precise. Any further financial support provided by me would be considered part of a shared family asset pool. Managed not by me, but by Karen Hale. I didn't move. Didn't breathe differently. But inside, something sharpened into focus. This wasn't about the wedding. This was about control. Future control. My savings. My accounts. Anything I might give from this moment forward. All of it redirected. Reframed. Taken. And the most elegant part? It would all happen with my signature. Voluntarily. Publicly. With witnesses. I lowered the paper slightly. Not enough for anyone else to see. Just enough to give myself space to think. Around me, the room had grown quiet. Not tense. Just expectant. They thought I was reading. Taking my time. Being thorough. They had no idea. I was understanding. I lifted my eyes slowly. Karen was watching me. Of course she was. Her expression still composed. Still pleasant. But there was something else now. A flicker. A question. Why is she taking so long? I held her gaze. Calmly. Silently. And in that silence, something passed between us. She knew. I had seen it. Not everything. But enough. Enough to make this moment unpredictable. For the first time that evening, she wasn't entirely in control. Is everything all right? She asked lightly, tilting her head just enough to appear concerned. I smiled. Softly. Yes, I said. My voice steady. Clear. Everything is very clear. A few people in the audience shifted slightly. The tone had changed. Just a little. But enough. I looked back down at the paper. Then at the pen in my hand. Elegant. Balanced. Ready. I turned it slowly between my fingers. For years, I had signed things without hesitation. Checks. Forms. Documents. Always trusting. Always assuming. Always believing that family meant safety. But now, I knew better. I lifted the pen, moved it toward the signature line, and paused. Just for a second. Just long enough for Karen's breath to catch. Barely noticeable. But I saw it. Because now, I was watching everything. I placed the tip of the pen against the paper. And instead of signing, I drew a single, slow line. Not across the signature, but under the clause. The one she thought I wouldn't notice. I tapped it gently with the pen, then looked up, directly at her. This part, I said calmly, my voice carrying just enough to reach the front tables, is interesting. The room shifted. Not loudly, but perceptibly. Like something invisible had just tilted. Karen's smile didn't disappear. But it changed. Tighter. Controlled. It's just standard wording, she replied smoothly. Nothing to worry about. I nodded slowly. Of course. I let the silence stretch. Then added, just as calmly. Would you mind explaining it to everyone? And that was the moment. The exact moment. When everything she had planned began to slip. Because now, this wasn't a private agreement anymore. It was a question. Public. Clear. And impossible to avoid. For a fraction of a second, no one spoke. The room didn't erupt. There was no gasp. No dramatic reaction. Just a shift. Subtle. But unmistakable. Karen's hand, still resting lightly against the side of the podium, stiffened just slightly. Her smile remained. But now, it required effort. That clause, she said, her voice still smooth, still composed, is simply a formality. It ensures that any contributions are properly recorded within the family structure. A few heads nodded. Not because they understood, but because it sounded reasonable. That was her strength. She didn't need people to understand. She only needed them to accept. I tilted my head slightly. Within the family structure, I repeated softly. Yes, she said, a little more quickly now. It's just about organization. Transparency. I nodded again. Slowly. As if I were considering her words carefully. Then I lowered my eyes to the document once more and traced the line of text with the tip of my pen. Managed by you, I added quietly. The room stilled again. This time, a little more noticeably. Karen didn't respond immediately. Just a pause. Small. Controlled. But real. It's just temporary oversight, she replied. Until everything is settled. I lifted my gaze. Met hers. And what exactly, I asked gently, is everything? That did it. A ripple moved through the front tables. Not loud, but present. People shifted in their seats. Leaning slightly forward now. Listening. Because something no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like something else. Karen let out a soft laugh. Light. Dismissive. Oh, Margaret, she said. You're overthinking this. It's just paperwork. We didn't want to burden you with the details. I smiled. The same calm smile I had worn all evening. I see. I turned slightly. Just enough to face the audience. The guests. The witnesses. My daughter-in-law says I'm overthinking, I said lightly. A few polite chuckles. Uncertain. Waiting to see where this would go. I held up the paper. Not dramatically. Just enough for it to be seen. This document, I continued, states that not only are all past contributions considered gifts, a pause, but any future support I provide will be placed under someone else's control. Silence. This time heavier. No laughter. No movement. Just stillness. I let the words settle. Didn't rush. Didn't push. Because truth doesn't need volume. It only needs space. Karen stepped forward slightly. Margaret, that's not. I raised my hand gently. Not to stop her. Just to pause the moment. I'm not upset, I said calmly. And I wasn't. Not anymore. I'm just making sure I understand what I'm being asked to sign. I looked back down at the paper. Then at the pen. Then, I placed the pen down. Carefully. Deliberately. On top of the document. I don't sign things I don't fully understand, I said. My voice didn't rise. Didn't harden. It didn't need to. Because the meaning was already clear. Karen's smile. Faded. Not completely. But enough. Enough for those closest to see it. For the first time that evening, she looked uncertain. This is hardly the time for this kind of discussion, she said, her tone shifting slightly. We're in the middle of a wedding. I nodded. You're right. I looked around the room. At the guests. At the tables. At the stage that had been so carefully arranged. This is a celebration, I agreed. Then I looked back at her. So let's not turn it into something else. Another pause. And this one, cut deeper. Because now, everyone understood. Not the details. Not the legal language. But the dynamic. The imbalance. The intent. Karen stepped back slightly. Recalculating. Adjusting. But it was too late. The moment had already shifted. This was no longer her stage. Not completely. I reached for the document again. Closed the folder gently. And handed it back to the assistant. Perhaps, I said calmly, we can revisit this another time. The assistant hesitated. Then took it. Karen didn't stop him. She couldn't. Because now, she wasn't just managing a situation. She was managing perception. And perception had already changed. I stepped away from the podium. Slow. Composed. And as I turned, I caught a glimpse of the room. People watching. Not with amusement anymore. Not with indifference. But with awareness. And for the first time that evening, I wasn't the quiet woman at table 12. I was the one who had just said no. Without raising my voice. Without creating a scene. Without losing control. And somehow, that made it louder than anything else that had happened all night. I didn't go back to my seat immediately. Instead, I stepped away from the stage, slowly, letting the silence follow me. Not heavy. Not uncomfortable. Just present. The kind of silence that lingers after something has shifted, but before anyone decides how to respond. I could feel their eyes. Not all of them. But enough. Enough to know that whatever Karen had planned was no longer unfolding the way she expected. I walked past the tables. Past the soft candlelight. Past the carefully arranged centerpieces that I had once chosen with such care. And this time, I didn't feel like I was outside of it. I felt like I was finally inside the truth of it. Near the back of the room, I paused beside one of the service stations wherein used place cards and extra menus were stacked neatly. Small details. Overlooked. Unimportant. Or so they thought. I set my purse down gently and reached inside. My fingers closed around something familiar. An envelope. Thin. Unmarked. I had brought it with me that evening. Not with a plan. Not with intention. Just out of habit. Because over the years, I had learned something simple. When people begin to change, paper begins to follow. I pulled the envelope out and held it for a moment, feeling its weight. Light. But significant. Behind me, I could hear the music start again. Soft. Carefully timed. Karen was recovering. Of course she was. She always did. I didn't turn around. Instead, I opened the envelope. Inside were copies. Documents I had received weeks ago, but hadn't fully understood at the time. Statements. Transfers. Authorizations. Small things. Subtle things. The kind that don't raise alarms unless you look closely. And now, I was looking closely. One page in particular caught my attention. A transfer authorization. Partial. Repeated. Over several months. Not large amounts, but consistent. Directed toward an account I didn't recognize. At the time, I had assumed it was related to wedding expenses. Coordinated through Karen. Efficient. Organized. Responsible. That was the word she liked to use. Responsible. But now, I saw it differently. I checked the account name again. Then the routing details. Then the authorization signature. Mine. Or at least something that looked like it. I traced it lightly with my finger. The shape. The flow. The hesitation in the final stroke. It was close. Very close. But not exact. And suddenly, another memory surfaced. A week ago, Karen sitting beside me at my kitchen table. Just a few forms, she had said. Nothing complicated. I had signed them. Without reading closely. Because I trusted her. Because I believed we were still a family. I closed the folder slowly. Carefully. Not with anger. Not with panic. Just precision. Because now, this wasn't about a name tag. Or a speech. Or even a document on a stage. This was a pattern. Financial. Deliberate. And far more serious than I had allowed myself to see. I slipped the papers back into the envelope and returned it to my purse. Then I lifted my head. Across the room, Karen was speaking again. Her voice steady. Recovered. Redirecting attention. Let's continue celebrating. She was saying, tonight is about love, family, and new beginnings. Applause followed. Some of it genuine. Some of it necessary. I watched her for a moment. The way she moved. The way she smiled. The way she filled the space as if nothing had happened. And I understood something important. She believed she had contained it. Controlled it. Turned it into a minor interruption. But she was wrong. Because what she didn't know was that I had something she hadn't planned for. Not anger. Not confrontation. But evidence. And more importantly, time. I picked up my purse. Straightened my dress. And this time, I did return to my seat. Table 12. Same place. Same distance. But now, I wasn't sitting there as an afterthought. I was sitting there waiting. Because some things don't need to be exposed immediately. Some things are far more powerful when revealed at the right moment. And as I looked down at the name tag still pinned to my chest, the old woman who pays for everything, I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. Because for the first time that evening, I wasn't wearing it as an insult. I was wearing it as a reminder of exactly what they thought I was. And exactly how much they had underestimated me. Top of form, bottom of form, the evening continued. As if nothing had happened. The music grew livelier. Glasses were refilled. Laughter returned, softer at first, then louder, as people allowed themselves to move past the interruption. That's what people do. They adjust. They smooth things over. They choose comfort over clarity. And Karen understood that better than anyone. From across the room, I watched her regain control. She moved from table to table, her hand resting lightly on shoulders, her smile warm again, her voice perfectly balanced between gratitude and authority. If someone had walked in at that moment, they would have seen nothing unusual. Just a beautiful wedding. A confident host. A happy family. But I knew better. And more importantly, I knew something she didn't. That the story hadn't ended on that stage. It had only shifted location. I reached into my purse again. Not to take anything out this time. Just to feel the envelope still there. Grounding. Real. Because what I was about to do wasn't emotional. It was deliberate. After a few minutes, I stood up. This time, I didn't hesitate. I walked directly toward the front of the room. Not to the stage, but to the head table, where Karen stood beside my son, speaking to a group of guests. She saw me coming. Of course she did. Her posture changed slightly. Barely noticeable. But I saw it. Because now, I noticed everything. Margaret, she said smoothly as I approached. Are you enjoying the evening now? I smiled. Yes, I said. Very much. I turned slightly toward the guest she was speaking with. Would you excuse us for a moment? I added gently. They stepped back without question. Because tone matters. And mine left no room for refusal. Karen waited until they moved away. Then her smile faded. Not completely, but enough. What is it? She asked quietly. No performance now. No audience. Just calculation. I met her gaze. Calm. Steady. I was thinking about what you said earlier, I began. Her eyes narrowed slightly. What do you mean? About family, I said. About contributions. About doing things properly. A pause. I agree with you. That caught her off guard. Just for a second. I'm glad to hear that, she said carefully. I nodded. In fact, I think we should make everything very clear. I reached into my purse. This time, I took the envelope out. Her eyes dropped to it immediately. A flicker. Gone quickly. But not fast enough. What's that? She asked. Just some paperwork, I said lightly. Her lips pressed together for a fraction of a second, then relaxed. I think we've had enough paperwork for one evening, she replied. I smiled again. Not this kind. I opened the envelope. Slowly. Not dramatically. Just enough to let the moment breathe. And then I pulled out the first document. Held it between us. Not high. Not for the room. Just for her. Her eyes scanned it. Quickly at first. Then again. More carefully. And that was when it happened. That shift. Subtle. But unmistakable. The color in her face changed. Not pale. Not dramatic. Just less certain. This is just a routine transfer, she said quickly. Too quickly. I tilted my head slightly. Is it? She didn't answer immediately. So I continued. I noticed something interesting, I said. These transfers, they've been happening regularly. A pause. And they're authorized under my name. Her jaw tightened slightly. They are for the wedding, she said. You agreed to cover expenses. Yes, I said softly. I did. I let that sit for a moment. Then added. But I don't remember authorizing funds to be redirected to a personal account. Silence. This time heavier. Closer. Because now, we weren't on a stage. We weren't in front of guests. But the stakes were much higher. Karen's eyes flicked toward my son. Then back to me. Her voice dropped. Margaret, this is not the time. I raised my hand gently. Not to stop her. Just to hold the moment. I agree, I said calmly. It's not the time for confusion. I folded the document once. Carefully. Then slipped it back into the envelope. I think, I continued, we should review everything together. Her expression hardened. Just slightly. What are you implying? She asked. I met her gaze. And for the first time that evening, I didn't soften it. I'm not implying anything, I said. I'm asking. A pause. Clear. Sharp. Where did my money go? And that was it. The moment. The one she hadn't planned for. Because this wasn't a performance anymore. This wasn't something she could redirect or smooth over. This was direct. Private. Precise. And impossible to ignore. For the first time that night, Karen didn't have an answer ready. And for the first time in years, neither did I. But the difference now was that I was no longer the one being managed. I was the one asking the questions. Top of form, bottom of form. Karen didn't answer me immediately. For the first time that evening, she looked unprepared. Her eyes moved quickly to my face. To the envelope in my hand. Then briefly to my son. Wait. He had been standing beside her the entire time. Silent. Observing. But now, he was paying attention. Mom? He said, his voice uncertain. What's going on? I turned slightly toward him. And for a moment, I saw him the way he used to be. Not the man standing next to his wife, but the boy who used to look at me for answers. I was just asking a question, I said calmly. I held the envelope gently between my fingers. No accusations. Just clarity. Karen stepped in. Of course she did. She's misunderstanding the paperwork, she said quickly. It's all related to the wedding expenses. Everything is accounted for. Her voice was steady again. Controlled. But there was something underneath now. Pressure. I nodded slightly. Then it should be very easy to explain, I said. Silence. Not loud, but heavy enough for the people nearby to begin noticing. A couple at the next table turned subtly. A waiter slowed as he passed. Because tone travels. Even when words are quiet. Wade frowned slightly. What paperwork? He asked, looking between us. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I opened the envelope again. This time, I pulled out 2 documents and handed one to him. Take a look, I said. He hesitated, then took it. His eyes moved quickly across the page. At first casually, then slower, then again, carefully. What is this? He asked. His voice had changed. Less certain now. Karen stepped closer. It's exactly what I said, she replied. Transfers for the wedding. Wade shook his head slightly. No, this account. He stopped. Looked up. At her. Why is this going to your account? There it was. Clear. Direct. Unavoidable. Karen didn't answer right away. Just a fraction of a second. But enough. It's temporary, she said. For organization. Easier to manage everything in one place. I watched her. Calmly. Silently. Because now, She wasn't speaking to me. She was trying to convince him. And the signatures? Wade asked. He lifted the paper slightly. These don't look like Mom's usual signatures. Another pause. Smaller, but sharper. Karen's expression tightened. You're overanalyzing, she said. We had a lot to coordinate. Some things were handled quickly. I let out a soft breath. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just present. I remember signing something, I said. Both of them looked at me. At my kitchen table, I continued. You said it was just routine paperwork. Karen's eyes flickered. Wade turned toward her again. Karen. This time, there was something in his voice. Not confusion. Not fully. But something closer to doubt. And doubt was something she couldn't control as easily. I didn't think it was necessary to go into detail, she said, her tone shifting. We were under time pressure. I nodded slowly. That makes sense, I said. Then I added, just as calmly. But redirecting funds, without clear authorization, a pause. That's not pressure. That's choice. The word hung in the air. Unspoken, but understood. Around us, the room had changed again. Not loudly, but undeniably. People were watching now. Not openly, but enough. Because tension has a way of spreading, even when voices stay low. Wade lowered the paper slightly. His jaw tightened. Karen, he said quietly. Did you move Mom's money into your account? No smile now. No performance. Just a question. Direct. Karen held his gaze. And for a moment, I saw it. Calculation. Options. Exit strategies. But there weren't many. Not anymore. It was for the wedding, she said finally. Not a denial. Not an explanation. Just a statement. And that was all it took. Wade exhaled slowly. Looked down at the paper again. Then back at me. I didn't know, he said. I met his eyes. And for the first time that night, there was something real there. Not indifference. Not distance. But awareness. I know, I said softly. And I did. Because this wasn't about him. Not entirely. This had been built carefully. Quietly. Over time. But now, it was visible. Clear. Impossible to ignore. I took the document back gently. Folded it once. Slipped it into the envelope. And then, I did something very simple. I stepped back. Not dramatically. Not abruptly. Just enough. I think, I said calmly. This conversation deserves more time than a wedding can offer. No accusation. No anger. Just truth. I looked at Karen one last time. Not with hostility. Not with triumph. But with something far more unsettling. Clarity. Enjoy the evening, I added softly. Then I turned and walked away, leaving them standing there. Together. But not united. And for the first time that night, the imbalance had shifted. Not loudly. Not completely. But enough. Enough to know that what they had built in silence was beginning to come apart. And I hadn't raised my voice once. Top of form, bottom of form, I didn't look back. Not at Karen. Not at Wade. Not at the stage, or the tables, or the room I had once believed I belonged to. I simply walked. Calm. Measured. Each step steady against the polished floor. The music resumed behind me. Soft at first. Then louder. As if nothing had happened. Because that's what they needed. Normal. Continuity. Something to hold on to. But I didn't need that anymore. I reached the edge of the ballroom and paused briefly near the entrance. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted one last moment to feel the difference. I turned slightly, just enough to take in the room one final time. The chandeliers still glowed. The flowers still stood tall. The guests still smiled. And at the center of it all, Karen, composed again, speaking, managing, trying to rebuild the version of the evening she had planned. But something had changed. I could see it now. Not in the decorations. Not in the music. But in the way people looked at her. A second longer than before. A little more carefully. A little less certain. And that was enough. I reached up and touched the name tag pinned to my dress. The old woman who pays for everything. I held it between my fingers for a moment. Then slowly, I removed it. Carefully. Without tearing it. Without anger. Just removing it. As if I were taking off something that no longer belonged to me. I looked at it one last time. Not with pain. Not with resentment. But with understanding. Because that label had never really been about me. It had been about how they saw me. And more importantly, how I had allowed myself to be seen. I folded it once. Then slipped it into my purse. Not as a wound. But as evidence. A reminder. Of the moment everything became clear. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Mom. Wait. I stopped. But I didn't turn right away. I let the silence settle between us. Then slowly, I faced him. He looked different. Not completely changed, but aware. I didn't know, he said again. His voice quieter now. Less certain. I nodded gently. I believe you. And I did. Because ignorance can be real, even when the consequences are not. He hesitated. Can we talk? Later. I studied his face for a moment. The confusion. The discomfort. The beginning of something else. Responsibility. Of course, I said. My voice calm. Unshaken. But not tonight. A pause. This isn't the place for understanding. He nodded slowly. As if he knew. I was right. I gave him a small, polite smile. Then I turned and walked toward the door. No one stopped me. No one called out. And somehow, that felt more honest than anything else that had happened that evening. The night air was cooler. Quieter. Real. I stepped outside and let the door close gently behind me. No dramatic sound. No final slam. Just a soft separation. I took a breath. Deep. Steady. And for the first time that day, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel excluded. I didn't feel like an afterthought. I felt clear. Because I hadn't fought. I hadn't argued. I hadn't needed to prove anything. I had simply seen the truth. And once you see something clearly, you can't unsee it. I walked down the steps slowly, the lights of the hotel fading behind me. In my purse, the envelope remained. The documents. The evidence. The truth. And I knew this wasn't the end. Not even close. Because what they had tried to take quietly would not stay hidden. Not anymore. But that would happen later. On my terms. In my time. With full clarity. Tonight. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need closure. I didn't even need answers. Because I already had something far more important. I had control. And for the first time in years, it belonged entirely to me.